The Plot Against America is set in an alternate history 1940s that centres on a Jewish family grappling with an America lurching towards fascism as a xenophobic populist demagogue ascends to the White House. I'm Rob Licuria, senior editor at Goldivy. I'm here with Emmy nominee Zoe Kazan, who plays a strong-willed matriarch of the family at the centre of this story. So this show starts out subtly, and then every single episode I felt like it really escalated. Like you go from visual cues to racial slurs, and then in the blink of an eye, violence, which culminates in persecution. It was very confronting. How did the show resonate with you personally when you were actually shooting it?
Well, I think an alternate history is the right word. This is, I think for me, crucially, this is not a show like Man in the High Tower, which imagines a different version of America. It's very much the America that we know and are living in. It just sort of imagines that things might have gone a little differently. A different person won an election. It's the little pushes of history, not the big ones. And that seemed very important to me while filming it, that we were talking about the country that we, or at least me and my countrymen, live in. We're holding a mirror up. We're not imagining a different version. And that spoke really powerfully to me even before we're living in the moment that we're living in right now, where I think we see I don't think it is a stretch to say that the cost of life that we've had during this pandemic could have been avoided if we had a different kind of leader in place, who was modeling different kinds of behaviors and setting different kinds of, policies.
Yeah.
It is an accident of this virus that it is affecting so much more, Black people and people of color in this country, but it is not an accident of the way that our country is arranged, that those people are, their lives are devalued, and the other ways that their lives are and health are put at risk. So, we shot this before this current moment, but I think we were speaking to a lot of the same kind of forces that run as undercurrents or as currents in our country.
Yeah, I mean, it's so obvious to talk about how eerily prescient the show is. And of course, the source material was, which was written a long time ago, and yet there were so many parallels to today that I found it really astounding. I had to keep looking back thinking, when was this actually done? Was it done 2 weeks ago? And then it must be said, when you watch this series, you know it's entertainment and you know it's revisionist history, and it's set a long time ago, but I found it to be disturbingly relevant. What did you think?
Well, Philip Roth wrote the novel, I believe, in 2003 or 2004. And he insisted he wasn't reflecting on the Bush presidency, but was operating from memories of his childhood. And, so much of the book, what's interesting to me is that so much of the book is autobiographical, but he sort of filtered his actual memories of growing up in Weequahic, New Jersey through this fractured history. But I think he was a writer who, with a kind of magnifying glass on our country and of its social values. So I think he had to have been responding to the current moment that he was in. You could say it's prescient, or you could say that he was just looking very clear-sightedly at the way our country operates and has operated since its inception.
Yeah, I think the key to drawing parallels is kind of what you touched on earlier, how a point of view that should ordinarily be abhorrent suddenly gains traction, right? And legitimacy through powerful, influential people that give it agency and oxygen. A great example is in episode 6, when Lindbergh's address on the radio. He talks about America's peace and prosperity, but neglects to mention Winchell or the anti-Jewish violence. And we've seen that a lot when we watch cable news, when the president says we're doing a great job, or there's great people on both sides. And that omission is intentional, and it's weaponized as unimportant or inconsequential. That really affected me. I'm wondering, were there any examples in the series where you had to kind of sit back and think, that's actually a really powerful thing that we're doing?
Well, You know, the series is in large part very faithful to the book. And I have to say, my experience reading the book was an almost uncanny experience. You know, I read it in November of 2018. We were, you know, almost 2 years into the Trump presidency at that point. And I thought, oh, our audience is going to think that we invented some of this to create stronger parallels to the moment we're living in. But no, you know, there, not just in our country, but around the world, we have seen in the last 4 years a rise of nationalism, for lack of a better word. And, you know, making this, it felt very important to us that it is a slow creep. Like, as you said, the series starts out in this kind of slow burn way. This is not about huge social upheaval. It's about, like I said, you know, a small gesture that snowballs, or like you said, a permission being granted by our leaders modeling certain kinds of behavior. And I guess it was interesting for me to be playing this character who's really not politically active, and she's activated mostly, or motivated mostly, by wanting to protect her family. You know, her sphere is the domestic, and she doesn't really think very far beyond that at the beginning of the series. And she's not an incredibly vocal person. She becomes increasingly vocal over the series, but she's not really the leader of their household. You know, she's in a very traditional marriage for the time period. Her husband makes the decisions for the family, and she makes their life possible. And it was a real honor and pleasure to get to explore what that's like, and to find dignity in that person, and to lend legitimacy to her standpoint. I think, you know, we have such a premium on strong female characters, and I think that can be misconstrued as meaning like every female character has to like speak her mind and kick ass and, you know, be Lara Croft but with Gloria Steinem glasses. And I just don't think that that's what we're asking for when we're asking for strong female representation. We're asking for a representation of the female point of view. And that was something I really fought for as we were making this. You know, it's from a male writer's book. We had 2 male screenwriters doing the bulk of the adaptation. So I didn't feel it was out of place for me to raise my hand sometimes and say, can we think about her perspective?
Yeah, I love that. And it's so apparent when you're watching Bess, because yes, she's a stay-at-home mum. Yes, she's not a career woman. And yes, she doesn't necessarily defy her husband in this crazy way where she's throwing plates and glasses at him, but she is really intelligent. She's the matriarch of the family, and there's some great examples when you're performing her, that you can see her strength, and she's kind of the glue that holds them together. Here's a great one. This is for me. Maybe we can I can ask you the same question. In episode 4, Bess slaps Sandy across the face for suggesting that his father is worse than Hitler. Now, normally that would just be a terrible thing for a child to say, but I read that as Bess being terrified that her son doesn't fully appreciate the ideology that he seems to idealize could actually get him killed. Like, it was deeper than that. And I found it a really impactful scene to do. Can you take us maybe back to that particular scene and what it was like to do that one?
Yeah. Yes. Caleb Malice, who plays our older child, Sandy, this was his first job. He, as a professional actor, I think he had done one commercial before this, but he got kind of thrown into the deep end, and he was so extraordinary. Both the children, Ajay Robertson and Caleb Malice, were both just absolute pleasures to work with, and it was very easy to think of them as real scene partners and not as children. But it's hard when you're performing a scene like this where there's so much being required emotionally from them. And from Caleb, you know, there's a lot technically with faking a slap. And so I felt a lot of pressure to take care of them during this scene, which I think added an interesting layer, because I think you're right that she's slapping her child, but she's doing it out of love and out of fear for his safety. He sort of idealizes Charles Lindbergh, and he's he's asking to go to this dinner at the White House, where they're going to honor a Nazi, von Ribbentrop. And it's just, I think she feels her failure as a mother to have instilled already in him a sense of principle that would prevent him from wanting to go do this. But I think she's also, like you said, she's acting out of fear, and behind that fear is love. So I do think there was this other layer of me feeling tremendous love for these actors and wanting to protect them and wanting to make sure that they came away from this day, both him and Eji, who's watching the scene, who plays young Philip, that they walked away from the scene feeling good about the day, feeling protected, feeling like something scary hadn't happened, you know. And so I think that you can probably read that layer in what I'm doing. That's my best guess.
It's great that you say that, because a lot of Bess's power is her role as mother. You know, we all mostly have very strong feelings towards women who are in that role for obvious reasons. A great example for me as well is, and I think if there's going to be a moment when we show clips at award shows, for example, it'll be this one. And it's in episode 6 when Bess is on the phone with Selden. It seems like a very obvious thing to talk about, but it was so, it resonated with me a lot, because the second conversation, I'm thinking more so, when it's effective, it's this wide shot that comes in onto you, and the child is terrified. Bess goes into mum mode in the best way she can, but she's flinching whilst these gunshots are going off around her. There was a lot going on in that scene to unpack. What were your thoughts on how that came out?
Yeah, I mean, that's a scene I really fought for. I mean, obviously it would have been in, but when I first signed on to the project, the last scripts weren't written yet. Only the first script was written. And when I read the book, it's a very powerful scene in the book of her talking to Selden. And when I went in to meet with David for the first time, I said, I really would love for as much of this to be there as possible. And I know it's hard because it's just a phone call, but it seems like this is her stepping up to the plate. This is the apotheosis of who she is and how she's changed meeting. That she always was this mother, but she never thought of herself as having this kind of like reserve of strength that she shows in that scene. And I was so happy with how they adapted it. And then Tommy Schlamme, who directed it, came to me like maybe a week before we shot and said, can you be really off book for that scene? Because I want to do it in one. And he told me about the shot that he envisioned, and like, can we do it like a play essentially? And so, I was already ready to do that. But one challenge was we couldn't shoot it with the actual child speaking in the scene, because there are all these child labor laws, and for a lot of different reasons, they needed him shooting on those same days. And so for a minute, it looked like I could actually do it with Jacob Laval, who plays Selden. And then it was like, oh no, you're going to have to shoot it with someone else reading those lines off camera. And I like spent the week auditioning people, basically. Like I would walk around set and be like, oh, can you read lines with me? It's like this PA or that PA, and our second AD ended up being the person that I thought like read Selden the best. And Tina Marie, she stood in like the bathroom off like the set bathroom off screen and read with me. And I really, it was like such a group effort of like our amazing camera ops like learning how to do that push in a way that like was completely steady, and our effects guys standing off screen with wooden blocks to make those gunshots. And it felt like such a group feat. And it was so exciting to get it and to know that we had it. And it felt like such an important part of her character. So I've been really gratified to see that scene speak to people, because it feels like such a linchpin of her journey, and even more than the scene with her sister later when she kicks her sister out, which is also a very important scene for the plot of it. But I think in terms of her stepping into her power, that scene seemed more important to me.
Yeah, it was incredible. You know, the show works really well on a macro level, right? 30,000 feet from the ground, immersing us in this alternate reality. it's very uncomfortably familiar. We've talked about that, but at its core, I think the show's effective on the granular level because it allows us to viscerally experience what's going on to this family. What were your thoughts on how the show integrates those two dynamics, much like the source material does?
Well, I think this is a testament to David Simon and Ed Burns, his writing partner. And I think you see it in other shows of theirs, like The Wire, but also like Treme and The Deuce, which I also worked on with David. You know, they are really good at that, showing that relationship between the micro and the macro. And I think they think about systems in a way better than probably any other television makers of our day, possibly ever. You know, I think that they are really interested in how the personal is political and the political is personal, and the effect of these big forces on, for lack of a better word, like small people or small lives, like people who are just who typify their population, or who are not in any way socially extraordinary. I think that's also what Philip Roth was trying to do in his book. So I think it's a good marriage of source material and adapters.
Yeah, and you touched on the scene. Yeah, you touched on the scene with Evelyn at the end, Winona Ryder, when like I thought it was enough that Bess threw her out, but then to go out and kind of embrace her because you know she still recognizes she was her sister, but then say that's it, we're done here. I felt to be also quite powerful. Were you happy with the way that scene turned out? Because you and Winona Ryder seemed to have a really great chemistry, but it was so that it made it even more upsetting to see that that was going to be the end of their relationship.
Yeah, I loved working with Winona. You know, she had been such an icon for me growing up. I had to get over that initial kind of thing of, you know, but because you know, Bess looks up to her older sister and that's part of their dynamic, I also thought we could use it a little, the kind of glamour of that person for Bess. Um that day was a very hard shooting day. That goodbye outside, we were losing our light. There's a lot of challenges of working with children. These children weren't challenging to work with, but you end up, you know, having to prioritize their shooting schedule. And so we ended up having to shoot in like the last hour of daylight we had for this very crucial scene. And we were shooting not far from where it's actually set in New Jersey. So we were right by Newark Airport. So planes kept taking off. So we ended up having to like ADR quite a lot of that scene. So when I watch it, I'm looking at all the difficulty we had in getting it, and it's harder for me to appreciate the actual scene. But it is it's such an important moment because Bess has given her sister so much room in there, that she's given her so much rope to hang herself with, basically. You know, she doesn't want to think of her sister as being a Nazi sympathizer, for instance, and she doesn't want to think of her as being, you know, morally negligent. And so for her to hold her sister to her actions and refuse to allow her into their life any further, it's a very strong decision to make. And I'm glad it felt powerful to you.
Yeah, it definitely did. Final question is about the ending, because it diverges quite a bit from the book. It's very interesting to me. I thought it was a really good way to end it. The nation appears to be healing while the First Lady is attempting to restore order and promote unity, but those wounds and scars will remain. A lot like what we're going to see and what we're seeing in the United States now. And that's very powerful. I'm wondering, did you find the ending hopeful and optimistic, or tragic and melancholy, or something else? How did you feel about it?
Well, the series ends with this sort of like montage leading up to election night, and it ends in a kind of cliffhanger. You don't resolve how the election goes, which is different from the book. And you see all kinds of mixed images. You see hopeful images of people casting their ballots, and you see images of ballots being burned. And it's unclear who's doing the burning, which side of the political equation. You know, we have a kind of myth in our country that every vote counts. And just within my own lifetime, I've seen that to be not true at least twice, right? And then there's also, you know, a history of organized voter suppression in this country, legal voter suppression, whether it be towards people of color and Black people, or whether it be towards undocumented people or felons, or, you know, earlier than that, women. And then there's also a history, a kind of shadow history of, you know, elections being rigged, you know, LBJ's kind of famously. So it's complicated. I think that David was trying to speak to that complication. I think he uses a very kind of like patriotic Frank Sinatra song to end it, but I do think there's some irony in its usage. I am very moved by the idea that we could turn the tides of history by voting as a bloc. I also pin my personal hopes on that, that we could prove ourselves to be a true democracy. But I think that David is not a sentimentalist. I think he's a realist. And so I think he was trying to allow that ambiguity even at the very end, even in the last shot of the series.
Yeah, it's totally appropriate for what we had already seen over 6 episodes. I found the show really cathartic and moving, and thanks so much, Zoe, for your time. So I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Everybody go Gold Derby, make your predictions, click subscribe, do all those things you normally do, and make sure you come back and watch all of our great chats. We've got heaps of them.